and welcome back. My name is Laura Berrocal, and I am a member of the Digital Empowerment and Inclusion Working Group and co-chair of the Digital Inclusion Subgroup. I'll be moderating today's discussion with my fellow DEI Working Group colleague, Felicia West. Before we move in to introduce our distinguished speakers, I'd like to take a moment to set the framework for today's discussion on libraries and community partnerships. During our earlier session, we heard from local libraries and state library associations regarding their thoughts and perspectives on ways to foster greater digital inclusion within underserved communities. What we learned is when deep, the million-dollar question is, what are the actual causes for today's digital divide? This is where the critically important conversation around digital inclusion and equity come in. So for the purposes of our conversation today, we will focus on the role that community and public-private partnerships play in advancing the work of libraries, particularly as it relates to broadband adoption and digital literacy training. So our conversation will essentially cover three key areas. They include 1, community partnerships as drivers of digital inclusion; 2, challenges to implementing, growing, and scaling programs, especially during a pandemic; and 3, capacity building and ensuring that libraries and community organizations have tools and resources necessary to effectively develop and implement partnership programs. So with that said, I'm going to hand it off to Felicia West to introduce herself as well as today's distinguished panel. Felicia?
Thank you, Laura. Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to facilitate this conversation today. I am Felicia West. I am Senior Policy Advisor at the Public Service Commission of the District of Columbia. I'm also a DEI Working Group member. We're going to get right into our discussion. As Laura just highlighted, we're here today to talk about libraries and public-private partnerships. One of the things that I want to begin as we lay the foundation, I want to say that we're going to start off with a kickoff question. And as we've already discussed, we have a certain order, and we will allow our panelists to respond. And we would go in the order of Broderick, Sindy, Jillian, Emily, Antonio, and Katherine. The first kickoff question, just to give a little bit about or give information about what you do, can each panelist give us an idea of what your organization is and mission and what some of the core services that you offer, as well as your groups that you offer those services to? Broderick?
Yeah, thank you, Felicia. Thank you, Laura, as well. And it's great to be part of this discussion. I look forward to a very lively and informative conversation. I look forward to learning from the other panelists, certainly, as well. So I'm here in my capacity as the chairman of the My Brother's Keeper Alliance. In the Obama administration, I served the last 3 years as President Obama's cabinet secretary. And if I didn't already have enough to do, I also chaired the My Brother's Keeper Task Force, which was created in February 2014 by President Obama, largely out of his deep concerns about what was happening to boys and young men of color, especially, and in the wake of the Trayvon Martin tragedy as well. So for the last 3 years of the administration, we got My Brother's Keeper stood up with a full government approach, a data-driven approach, really looking at the disparities that begin so early in life, not just for boys and young men of color, but girls and young women of color, and really a lot of kids in this country who are disadvantaged. And by looking at where the disparities exist, we also could look at, what kind of programs were effectively making a difference and what sort of programs could be scaled. And also to look at what the private sector could do working along with government. So we spent a good 3 years on that work, came up with all sorts of recommendations. A lot of those recommendations, particularly about solutions, had to do with digital inclusion issues, realizing that the gaps were only going to continue, especially around education and employment and training, and just a view of the world, that those would only get worse if we didn't address digital divide and digital inclusion issues as well. So that was a big part of the work that we did. While we were doing our work in the White House, there was also a parallel organization that was started in the private sector by a number of business leaders and foundation leaders, and that was called the My Brother's Keeper Alliance. We had the task force in the White House, the alliance outside. The alliance, especially though, worked with the for-profit and business sectors to stand up programs and to have all sorts of both financial contributions, but also in-kind contributions made, again, to address these disparities. One that directly relates then to what we're talking about today was a commitment made by Sprint back in 2016 through the 1 Million Project to align and partner with MBK communities across the United States to provide 1 million devices and also the services in order to connect young people in MBK communities across the country through the use of, being able to take advantage of digital opportunities. That program involved a 5-year commitment. It continues through 2022. There are 15 communities across the United States that have been very much involved in the work. We look forward, though, to certainly other companies being involved in making sure that both the devices and the services get out there and that we can expand even more broadly, notwithstanding the fact that, of course, Sprint and T-Mobile merged, and now there's a new T-Mobile, and we look forward to those conversations. Let me just sum it up with this. We know it is critical that communities of color, especially young people of color at all ages, have access not just to a device, but to a very, very strong device with great connectivity to make sure that they can compete both in terms of education, but also in employment-related opportunities as well. So that's who I am. Sorry for that long answer to your question, but I figured I'd introduce myself through that as well. So thank you, Felicia.
Thank you, Broderick. Sindy, if you would, it's great to hear the work that MBK is doing. Sindy, if you would, when you give some idea of the services that you're offering and kind of highlight some of the digital inclusion programs that you offer. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Felicia. Thank you for having me. My name is Cyndee Landrum. I am the Deputy Director for the Office of Library Services at the Institute of Museum and Library Services, also known as IMLS, and you may have heard a little bit about us in the previous panel. We are the primary source of federal funding for our nation's museums and libraries, and we also play an important role in research and policy development. We are a funding agency, so we don't necessarily have direct-to-user programs. Though, as you heard in the previous panel, we do have some funding streams that support museums and libraries, in this case libraries, specifically around digital inclusion activities and work. We heard a little bit about our Grants to State program, which supports our state library administrative agencies in their work in their states around digital inclusion. And we also have a portfolio of discretionary grants that support digital inclusion. That encompasses a wide variety of work that's broadband and connectivity focused, all the way to digital skill building, capacity building for librarians and library staff to support digital inclusion in their communities, and offers and looks at a wide range of skills, everything from workforce development to language and cultural preservation as a source of building digital inclusion and digital skills, and everything in between. Thank you.
Great, Cyndee. It sounds like you and your role serve as a hub for all of our other libraries and institutions across the nation. Thank you for your comments. Now we will go on to Jillian.
Hey, thank you. Good morning or afternoon. I just want to thank the working group for having me and orchestrating this important conversation today, and to also just express my appreciation for all the other panelists. It's just really amazing work. So the Afterschool Alliance is a national nonprofit organization with a mission to ensure an accessible, affordable after-school program for every youth who wants one. And when I say after-school programs, I really mean before school, after school, and summer. These are the programs you envision operating, for example, when the school day ends from 3 to 6 p.m., that offer student enrichment activities that support their school day academics. They might offer a snack or dinner and provide opportunities for physical activity and recreation as well. They're comprehensive programs. They operate in rural, urban, and suburban areas, at schools, at Boys and Girls Clubs, YMCAs, religious institutions, housing buildings, and also private centers and civic spaces like parks and recreation centers and at libraries. For working parents, they can really bring peace of mind that their children are engaged and supported in learning when school is out. And for students, they can be places to explore their passions and connect with caring adults, express their choice and voice, and become leaders, and really continue to develop the all-important skills of communication, collaboration, and creativity that will serve them well into their careers. At the Afterschool Alliance, we don't run any after-school programs directly, and we're not a membership organization. What we do is work towards our mission by helping to coordinate after-school programs as a field by providing research, advocacy, and communication for the field of after-school across the country. We communicate with over 10,000 programs, with national partners and providers, and with statewide after-school networks in all 50 states. In the research field, we conduct a survey about every 5 years known as America After PM that really assesses the supply and demand of after-school programs across the country. And so from this survey, we know that about 10.2 million youth ages 5 to 18 are participating in these programs, but really there are still 19 million youth who would want to participate if a program were accessible and affordable to them. We also look closely at rural areas and areas of concentrated poverty where this need is further increased. We also provide issue briefs and research for the field about how these programs intersect and influence key areas of interest, such as civic engagement, social and emotional learning, science, technology, math, and engineering, student resilience through their trauma, literacy, workforce, and more. And we use this knowledge to communicate with the field and share best practice and examples, as well as to communicate with decision makers to ensure that wherever possible, these programs are available and affordable at the highest level of quality, which really means supporting and advocating for public funding and investment at the national, state, and local levels. We also coordinate nationwide events like on After School, where every fall we have programs all around the country open up their doors so that their community can see the exciting things taking place in After School. So we're really excited to be here today because there's a lot of overlap we share with both libraries and technology, and After School programs make great partners. I personally know how after schools and libraries can work together. I did work for a summer in an after-school program located here in DC, where I live, at a housing provider in their community center on site. And a staff member that I was working with at the camp suggested we plan to take the students to the local library. These are students in grades K through 5, and the library was 2 or 3 blocks away. And in our first visit, we realized right away that many of the campers had never been. And so we were able to work with their parents and sign them up for their first library cards, and then able to make weekly visits. In 2017, the After School Alliance partnered with the StarNet Project, the Science, Technology, Activities, and Research Library Education Network, and with the American Library Association to study some of the connection between our fields, and found that over 74% of after-school programs have worked with their public library, including on summer reading, learning initiatives, library visits to take out books or use the computer, STEM education, and professional development, among other areas. One of the restraints the study mentioned to working with libraries was physically getting the students on the site, as well as after-school programs' lack of knowledge of the types of programs libraries were offering, which included oftentimes STEM and maker spaces. So we're working towards more communication in those areas. In addition to libraries and inside the digital space, after-school programs also offer these types of activities themselves on site. They do STEM, maker spaces, digital literacy, workforce pathways. And for example, there are programs like Digital Harbor in Baltimore, Maryland, right nearby, which is a nonprofit after-school program that really focuses on youth engagement with technology and has classes like sophomore development, cybersecurity, and IT, as well as offering certification in areas like the CompTIA IT fundamentals test. So I'll stop there, but I'm looking forward to the conversation and I'm glad to be part of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Jillian. Thank you. It looks like Afterschool Alliance has developed a significant blueprint methodically to have a very, very far reach. And so thank you for your work and being here with us today. Now we're going to go on to Emily.
Great. Thank you all so much for having me. Really excited to be here with all of you today. As Felicia mentioned, my name is Emily. I am the Senior Manager of Community Partnerships and Outreach here at Girls Who Code. Girls Who Code is an international nonprofit leading the movement to close the gender gap in technology and change the idea of what a programmer looks like and does. We specifically focus on inspiring, educating, and equipping girls with the soft skills and coding skills that they need to persist in the 21st century and to succeed and thrive. We specifically, since we were founded in 2012, have served over 300,000 girls through our programs, including our clubs program, our summer immersion program, and our college loops program. and over 500 million people through our campaigns, our advocacy work, and our 13-book New York Times bestselling series as well. Since the past 2 years, we've also gone international. So in addition to the United States, we also serve programming in Canada, the UK, and India, and are continuing to support and provide resources across the world as well. And everything that we do, we serve all girls, knowing that all girls have the abilities to succeed and use code to change the world in a variety of different ways. We specifically focus on girls as well who are underrepresented in computer science, are free and reduced lunch eligible, have little to no exposure in computer science and related fields, or identify as female regardless of gender assignment at birth. So we are definitely very inclusive environment as well. Our core programming across the board is definitely our club program. It's a completely free after-school program that provides free curriculum, resources, training, and ongoing support to educators, librarians, and other nonprofit youth workers all across the country and internationally as well. That focuses on 3rd to 5th grade and 6th to 12th grade students as they learn to be brave and resilient as they use code to change the world. Overall, our programming does focus on 3 primary aspects to our educational philosophy as well, including 1, teaching more than code. So we definitely want to give our young people the computational thinking skills to take that digital literacy to the next level and be able to access a lot of financial freedom that comes with coding skills. And so it focuses on the coding skills in addition to bravery, resilience, creativity, innovation, and a lot of other kind of project management and public speaking skills too to help them persist. Secondly, we focus on sisterhood and that idea of community building, both bringing in more female representation in a lot of the programs and curriculum that we put out, as well as forming a supportive network of peers and mentors to really make sure that they can persist as they get older. And lastly, making sure it is real world relevant and impactful always to 1, keep the students engaged, because we know that it is much more impactful as they ignite different passions for real world problems in the community that they want to solve, to make it really connected and relevant to their lives, and help them see too that they can do so many different things with their new skills. Across the board, everything that we offer is extremely flexible to provide resources and curriculum. And so with our clubs program, which I'll talk a little bit about later as well, we definitely want to provide as much support to librarians as much as possible, whether they are brand new to coding and have never done it before, or if they are extreme experts in the field as well. So as much as we can bring all the communities together and provide them the resources they need to succeed, that's really our goal overall.
Wonderful, Emily. That's great to hear. That's part of the reason we're having this dialogue, to see how we can identify community and public-private partnerships. Thank you. Antonio?
Great. Thanks very much for having me. And thank you, Laura and Cindy, for being my technology Sherpas during this process. So we are focused, the Hispanic Heritage Foundation focuses on education, workforce, leadership, and culture. And I'll keep it to the programs that are related to technology and closing this digital gap that we actually call the tech equity gap, because that equity gap is getting bigger and bigger in education as well as workforce development, especially during this time. And Emily, thank you for the work that you do. It's great hearing about it from you, and certainly a huge fan of everyone that's on this call. Broderick, I remember you from the Obama administration. So there's a program that we have called Code as a Second Language, which is at this point teaching over 100,000 kids how to code. And also, we also have offshoot programs like Hacking a Career, where we actually work through current opportunities that exist during and post-COVID. We've added that element to it, and a sourcing program where we actually place. So we want to take it full circle. We want to start by introducing kids to coding and doing that kind of work. And then the middle of the pipeline, where we're further advancing them and connecting them to others, and then actually putting them in a position to take jobs in that space. We've also, on the technology side, it's been a bigger challenge that we'll get into later. But I can tell you that it's highlighted in terms of this gap in access to technology. So I appreciate everybody that's on here doing that kind of work and working with libraries and museums has helped to consolidate, and those creative collaborations. I mean, Sindy just texted me and said, we need to get on the same page about some of these programs. That's going to be critical. And we're working with Savio and others in terms of actual boot camps to make sure that we're funneling people that are having career changes right now in this crisis to get into those jobs. How do you pivot? It's almost like retrofitting your career. And if we're able to do that, that's a very important thing, not just for the Latino community or underrepresented communities, but for the country, considering we're a minority majority. The other part of this is, I think it's really important, is the other programs that we've had as we've gone 100% digital, like most organizations during this crisis. Well, there's an educational crisis along with the financial and the health crisis. And so by going digital, it puts a more of an emphasis in terms of people being able to have access. So what we've had to do is to follow the footprint of some of our partners that are providing reduced access to Wi-Fi or to technology, or where they worked with a particular superintendent. We actually have to almost track that in order to execute our programming, because if we're in Salinas Valley or Rio Grande Valley and 4 out of 5 Latinos aren't able to work from home, actually it's 5 out of 6 Latinos aren't able to work from home, and we have a bigger issue in terms of people homeschooling children without being prepared for it. I certainly haven't been. And then the mental health issues that arise when you have everyone crammed in and having all of these additional responsibilities. And then, of course, the threat of getting COVID and getting thrown out of your home and being evicted and everything else. So it all ties together and is affecting education. The other thing that we want to do, too, is to work with, we want to make sure we have more creators than as much as consumers. And so we've been able to focus on that, and I'm glad to hear Emily talking about that too. So we've actually done research in terms of those impediments that I can talk about a little bit, and also want to make sure that we have social activists, that we're having a social impact, and access to technology is not only to be able to be educated and get a better job. It's also a way of working and building community and mobilizing community, especially during these times of social unrest. So the research we're doing is very important in that aspect, and role model campaigns that I'm sure Emily and Sindy and others understand, and certainly Broderick in terms of his work that he's been able to do. So we work with celebrities in order to push forward that strong message. For instance, the latest one that we haven't announced yet, but it's with Paulina Chavez from the show on Netflix, the expanding universe of Ashley Garcia. So we're able to push her out there as a role model that's doing it on the national scale, along with real life scientists and technology girls and females. But it's that relevance of having someone young that's a role model to somebody that's also young. So in all of our coding programs, we want to make sure that with all deference to wonderful, well-meaning retired engineers that are male and in their 60s, we want to make sure that it's a 19-year-old teaching a 14-year-old or a 24-year-old teaching a 17-year-old. That comes from their own community as well, because in the Latino community, there's an importance in being organic, that you're from the communities that you're serving. So that's just a little background of what we're doing. And again, Laura, thank you for inviting me to be here. And it's always comforting to be the weak link on a panel of this level.
I don't think you're quite the weak link.
Oh, I am.
There's no weak links here.
I like the point you made about the tech equity gap. That speaks to access and ensuring, and as you mentioned, highlighted, as we move forward in a more technological era, there will be more left behind, and what are we doing to respond to that? So thank you for your comments. Last but not least, Katherine.
Hi, everyone, and thank you again to our organizers for this opportunity. My name is Kat Trujillo. I'm the Director of Education and Deputy Director at Libraries Without Borders. Essentially, I wear many hats. Libraries Without Borders is an international nonprofit, and our work is focused on expanding access to information, education, and cultural engagement opportunities around the world, but specifically to people who are living in remote, isolated, or otherwise hard to reach and underserved communities. So we were founded in 2007, and the work we were doing then looks very different from what we're doing now. At that time, we were focusing on library systems and librarians themselves by providing professional development opportunities for them, as well as helping them expand their collections. But we were in Haiti when the earthquake struck, and that was an opportunity for us to reassess what our actual value was for the communities that, the end users, the communities that we were really hoping to serve. And at that point, we essentially rethought how we could provide services to meet people where they are. We developed this tool called the Ideas Box, which I can talk about in more detail later. But it was the beginning of a trend reflecting this idea of deconstructing the library and taking what is essential to the communities directly. So from refugee camps in Jordan to demobilization zones in Colombia, from mobile home communities to community gardens, and from neighborhood laundromats, that's where we go. Our Wash and Learn initiative is actually one of the most, it's a perfect example of just how we do that. It's our flagship program, and it has been in effect for 2 years now. Basically, we partner with neighborhood laundromats and libraries, and we transform spaces within the laundromats into connectivity hubs, places where folks can participate in digital literacy classes or ESL classes while they wait for their clothes to wash and dry. So that is one way that we try to make the most also of the time that people are spending that otherwise, wouldn't be used necessarily for digital literacy purposes. We are now, obviously, with COVID, our model is further evolving, and we have further deconstructed our WALL-E programming to provide connected tech kits, which are basically backpacks with a Wi-Fi hotspot, tablet, laptop, and curated educational resources that we deliver directly to to families in particular, but also adults that need these devices and this access to live, because everything is remote now, as this panel is evidence of. So that's it for now. I can go into more later, but that's it for me.
Wonderful, Katherine. Thank you. When you talk about Libraries Without Borders, I think it speaks to another level of creativity of how we're trying to bridge the gap on digital divide. So thank you for those comments. This is a good opening question to give us the lay of the land of kind of the expertise that you all bring to the table. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to my co-host, or my co-moderator, Laura.
Thank you. Thank you, Felicia. And thank you all for that perspective. I think it's great to kind of have that foundation and understanding of what you all do in your work. So given that we started a little late, let's get right into it. We walked through some of your signature programs and initiatives, the work that you're doing. I might just combine my first and second question together in the interest of time. So my first question was really going to focus on what the uniqueness of your programs and initiatives are, but perhaps we can integrate that into the question that's more focused on how your partnership initiatives are able to successfully reach and make an impact on communities where others failed. So where there are gaps in communities in terms of how they're being served, how do your programs come in and kind of fill that gap? And I think with answering that, you kind of touch on the uniqueness of your program as well. So maybe we can just kind of start with Broderick, because I like the letter B, because it's my last name. Can you kick it off?
Sure.
Great.
Thanks. So I think what makes, the My Brother's Keeper work different, certainly from all these great initiatives and all that I'm learning from you all. And by the way, let's talk partnerships with MBK communities, because many of them probably are being served already by your programs, but perhaps we can better link the relationship between MBK, because so much of our work is really focused on two principal things and supporting two principal areas. One is around, of course, violence reduction and what we can do to help lower not eliminate the violence that's going on in our communities. And second, around mentoring. When you think now about mentoring, for example, what tremendous challenges our communities are now facing around mentoring programs, because for a lot of these young people, of course, the mentors have been are a lifeline for them, to give them something positive to point to, something to learn from. And yet now, because of this pandemic, of course, many of our young people in these MDK communities are so disconnected, of course, from their mentors and vice versa, unless they have, of course, digital capabilities. And so we are putting an even greater emphasis on helping to identify resources and to scale programs that are addressing these things right away. These are urgent issues, of course, we know, to make sure that we can address. I love this term, by the way, too, tech equity. For decades, it's been the digital divide. I go back to my days in the Clinton White House, and we were talking digital divide, and people still have used that term, but I think there's so many equity-related issues, of course, that relate to, again, how sophisticated, whether the young people have devices at all, but then also how sophisticated those devices are and how connected they are, and whether they even have strong broadband where they are. But our programs are really focused on what can we do to help at the community-based level.
Okay, thank you for that. And I like that term, tech equity, too. I'm a fan of it. Emily, can we turn to you to give a range? You have a range of programs with Girls Who Code. Can you provide some perspective in terms of how you're filling the gaps within communities?
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2012, when we were founded by our CEO, Reshma Saujani, she really noticed kind of that divide as well, and that overall gap in terms of our young girls and young women in computer science classes. But there's so much opportunity, I think, in this space. So we really wanted to identify that inequity and then do something about it. And overall, we did do research with Accenture, one of our corporate partners as well, where in 1995, there were 37% of coders who are women. Now it's only 24%. And if we do nothing, our findings show that it'll go down to 22% in 2025. So, with 500,000 open computing jobs in the country today, but only 40,000 computer science graduates, and only 19% of our young college students majoring in computer science who are women, and only 2% women of color, that's really where we wanted to focus on our efforts and really show our young people too that there is opportunity out there, that there are people who look like them who they can aspire, and learn from, as well as, pave the way to get more women in the industry. And so for us, we do really have a big focus on, you cannot be what you cannot see. And so how can we increase the, level of female role models across a variety of different walks of life, variety of backgrounds, and variety of disciplines, to know that, there's 67% of jobs in non-tech traditional roles, right? So there's so many different things that they can do with it. And so across our programming too, in all the communities that we work with, urban, suburban, rural, all pockets of the country and beyond, we really want to be able to expose our young people to these really fantastic women in the industry. And because our clubs as well, definitely welcome students of all genders, in addition to being a girl supportive environment, I think it's really great too for all our young people to know that there are inspiring women in the industry, that they can do, anything and accomplish quite a significant amount to positively impact the community. So I would say definitely the perception piece, the activism, and overall our movement, even outside of our closed program, really focuses on changing those perceptions through a variety of different things.
Thank you, Emily. What I'm seeing with a lot of these programs is, despite the specific focus that they have, whether it's mentoring, whether it's leadership development, there seems to always be an underlining focus on advancing digital skills, understanding that that's something incredibly important that all students and even, adults need to be prepared to kind of get to work, go back to school. They need to have those digital skills. So piggybacking off of that question, Antonio, I'd like to just ask you if you could share some perspective related to some of the programs you have, because I know you have a Code as a Second Language initiative that's kind of targeting students in a different way. So could you talk about that and how you see that specific program or others really filling gaps and making sure that you're serving where others maybe are not there and present?
I think a lot of work is being done. It's just time to get creative with those collaborations and partnerships, and also working backwards from what the needs of the communities are that are very specific. So, for instance, we do code as second language in Spanish, where it's taught in Spanish, the curriculum's in Spanish, the leave behinds are in Spanish, and a lot of work with some of the youth that were unaccompanied minors, as they were called several years ago, that were coming into this country and were learning English as a second language at the same time that we were teaching code as a second language. And when we did our surveys afterwards, they said it was easier to learn coding than it was to learn English because it's much more consistent. And so we want to make sure that we're teaching it in culturally relevant ways, not just because of the language, and also with the parents there. I'll give you an example. We did something with one of our collaborators in Houston, in Dallas, Texas, is Adan Gonzalez, and he has the Puede Network, and we were able to work through him to teach about 300 kids how to code that were between K through 12. But their parents were there, and their parents, so we grilled, or his dad grilled, and so we had their parents. There was like another 150 parents there. Their parents realized that they started sitting down at the computer and learning the basics of coding as well. Because I can tell you that if your parents are smart enough to walk by a toaster that somebody discarded and is sitting on the side of the road and figure out how to make it work when they get home, they're going to be much more adept for, as Emily was saying, computational thinking than I am going to be as a former journalism major that can't put anything together. So we want to also take advantage of those opportunities, because I think that one of the big issues right now is that people during and post-COVID, and already we were heading in that direction, but it's been accelerated, have to pivot to aspects of what's in their arsenal in terms of being able to enter the workforce or pivot in the workforce. And this is going to be a key component of it, whether it's little kids or whether it's their parents. What's interesting is that everyone learns at the same level. You don't have to have a different curriculum for somebody that's a beginner. And that's a part of it that I think makes it, and we're very malleable with everything we do, Laura. So I think what also makes it unique is that nothing is set. We work off of an assessment in terms of that particular community, their experience, what their teachers said, what their parents say, and then we try to measure how it's impacted everything else, how it impacted their grades in their overall schoolwork, just from this part of it. And also sometimes when you're dealing with a particular group, how do you use coding as in terms of the curriculum being video game based, and other areas that you can actually do things that are very specific to how that community of young people wants to receive the information, instead of doing it like most educational systems that are going to try to jam it down your throat no matter what. So I think being malleable, being extremely flexible, and working backwards from what the needs are of the communities in terms of what the curriculum you're putting forward is. And as Emily said, having somebody that's young that resembles them, teaching them is going to be critical, so that it's not just a well-meaning person that is trying to work with them, because there's that role model component. We did research with the Student Research Foundation and found that the confidence gap was bigger in this particular study of 16,000 Gen Z students right now than the opportunity or the education and all these other gaps. It was actually confidence, so especially among young Latina girls. So how do you build that confidence? You want to make sure that they have somebody that they, as you said, see it, be it, as well as that are from their communities, because that's another aspect of this.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. That's a really, really great perspective. So I want to move a little bit into kind of like the metrics and like what the data tells us about programs. So my next question is going to be focused on that, and then we'll move into kind of a conversation around challenges and barriers to program implementation and growth. So my next question, what are some of your success metrics or case studies as it relates to advancing digital skills? For example, what does your program data show you? who typically takes advantage of your programs and why. And Cyndee, I'd like to start with you for a perspective from IMLS, just because I know you're not working necessarily directly with the beneficiary per se, but you're working with libraries and you're providing support to ensure that their programs are being managed properly and directed the way they should be. So if you could provide some perspective on the metrics piece, I think that would be really insightful.
Sure. So IMLS, what you may not be aware of is that IMLS does do several annual surveys that look at, for example, public libraries nationally to look at the work that they're doing, as well as our work with our partners. So one of the partners are our state libraries, and they do a survey about the programs that they fund through our Grants to States program. And to that end, one of the things sort of connected to the previous question for IMLS is that, you know, our funding is very broad and it covers a lot of territory. So, for example, in our Grants to States program, we rely heavily on our state libraries who know their communities and they know what the needs are and are able to structure the use of our funding in a way that benefits those communities. So there is, you know, obviously an emphasis on a lot of quantitative data around our funding. And then there are some interesting use cases. Currently, one of the projects that IMLS is working with libraries on is something called Measures That Matter, which is to really focus and target our metrics in a way that generates meaningful data. And we're working with a number of partner organizations, ALA, PLA, and SOCASLA, a number of other associations. For us, we also do look at, in our discretionary portfolio, our grantees are often developing their own evaluations that may measure both qualitative and quantitative. So we're doing use cases in some cases as well as other forms of qualitative evaluation. And so it's sort of a mixed method approach to looking at the effectiveness of a program, whether that is with our direct to the public programs or a lot of capacity building. So we work with libraries to develop the capacity of library staff to do digital inclusion work and to do training work. And so it's sort of a wide range of metrics and measures that we use to evaluate the success of the work that we fund.
Thank you for that, Cyndee. That's helpful. I'd also like to turn to Jillian on this question. Are there specific metrics that Afterschool Alliance applies in its program assessments that you'd like to share?
Thank you. Actually, so for the Afterschool Alliance, we don't operate any programs directly, but we have great examples like Emily on the call and Antonio that are doing exactly this type of work. And so they are collecting these metrics, and our job is really to make sure that people are aware of how impactful their programs are so that they continue to support them, so that all the people who are waiting to get into their programs and would love to have access in their own communities have that access that they need. And so the most important metric that we establish is how many students and families would love to have access to quality programs like theirs that don't currently, and that number is quite large and continues to grow. And then we also, are able to collect information from programs in the field that do communicate with us and are able to give us information. And so, for example, right now, obviously, we're all struggling with the COVID pandemic and wondering how many students have even that digital access that they need. And so we have programs like Afterschool Matters in Chicago is a great example of a high-quality after-school program that operates and helps teens in their community. And they were able to look at some data that found that 2/3 of the teens at schools went virtual were accessing the internet solely through their phone, and they weren't even able to download documents or stream video. And so we take information like this and make sure that broadly aware and accessible to other people so that they can make decisions on these accounts. Students would be able to go on Zoom calls, but only if they used all their data. They were completing their schoolwork from a cell phone and didn't have a keyboard to type with. And so these are the kinds of pieces of information that as an advocacy and research organization, we're able to collect and disseminate so that we can have conversations like these and figure out how to make sure that every student has the access and opportunity that they need.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you for that. So I'd like to now move it over, hand it off to Felicia. She's going to go into a deeper dive on the challenges piece. And thank you all for your comments on this portion of the conversation. So Felicia, I'll hand it off to you to go through some of these additional questions we have.
Thank you, Laura. As Laura just mentioned, we want to, part of our conversation today is to kind of give us an idea of some of the work you do, but also we want to know what those potential challenges and barriers are. And I want to start this question with Sindy. You, in your role, you know the policy considerations behind how to make libraries effective, how to make them vibrant in their communities. How has COVID challenged your work, and how are you addressing those challenges?
So as my colleagues on the previous panel discussed the pivot that many libraries had to make due to COVID, so IMLS did receive money in the CARES Act with a very clear focus in the legislative language around digital inclusion. And of course, we received $50 million. We were able to distribute $30 million through our Grants to States program to our state library administrative agencies to work directly in their states. And then an additional remaining funds are part of a competitive grant program that is still in running currently. What I can say is that it's not enough. The need is far greater than, I think we knew it was a great need. This circumstance, the pandemic, has really put in stark relief just how challenging this is for our library communities because, I think Rich talked about, 20 years that he and I both have been in libraries. The work of libraries, particularly around access, has been done in the library with computer labs and things of that nature. And, we have had our foray into providing hotspots and devices with varying degrees of success. But the pivot to digital has left many people out. And it has really sort of highlighted the need for us to think creatively about how we address connectivity, but also even when someone has access, just the ability to navigate. One of the things that we talk about at the agency is, yes, digital skills, but also telehealth and health literacy and all of those things that you now need in this current pandemic to be able just to stay healthy, just to be able to connect with your children's educational opportunities and educators and even to participate in some of my colleagues on this panel. Their program requires access and connectivity and then understanding of how to navigate the digital landscape.
Wonderful. I heard on our previous panel, someone made the analogy between having access to technology is like having access to running water or electricity. In the digital age that we live in, we can see that is more apparent day by day. And now that we're in this new normal, we're in a pandemic and looking post-pandemic, things would certainly be different. Broderick, would you like to share about some of the challenges that MBK has been facing?
Certainly, right away, I'd say by, late March or early April, we knew that we needed to reach out to the MBK communities across the country, and we needed to use our digital capabilities in order to be a gathering place. So we had, including with President Obama's participation in some of these, we had 6 town hall sessions where we brought together activists, leaders of MBK communities across the country, but also a lot of the young people that these communities work with, so they could hear from our leadership, hear from President Obama, hear from other folks, and to remind them that we care deeply about them, that the leaders in their communities care deeply about them, and that we would use digital capabilities to the extent that we could to stay in touch with them. But that's where the challenge is as well, of course, because in so many of these communities, the gaps already existed, and they've only gotten wider, because whether it's about access to education or whether it's just the isolation that we know about, or whether it be food security concerns that people have or food access concerns, we know the gaps have gotten wider and they are more dangerous. Our perspective, though, of course, fundamentally is how do we use the capabilities? How do we use digital access? How do we make the case for greater digital access at a time when we know it's even more critical that we address these issues? And so we see it as an opportunity to make the case even more, but the challenges are greater. There's no question about it. The challenges are even greater, and there's such a danger of leaving more and more of our young folks behind.
I agree with you. The education piece is a huge issue, and given the fact that most of our schools will be enrolling this fall either in a hybrid or virtual world, it's more critical for that to be used for our education. Jillian, you bring a unique perspective from the school setting. Would you like to share how the Alliance is doing in meeting the challenges of COVID?
Well, it's been obviously a bit stressful for all of us. And one of the things that, like Broderick was saying, that has come out of it is a lot of innovation and increased communication. And so the silver lining is that a lot of different partners that formerly saw themselves as separate players, whether it's libraries, schools, after-school programs, are coming together around the same table, meal service providers, to say what can we do right now, because we know this is an all-hands-on-deck type of situation. And so some of the benefits that have come out of that have just been these conversations about building those connections between the family, the school, the community, and community partners, and those resources, whether they're mental health resources or food resources or technology resources that every family needs. And so from the broader after-school perspective, we saw that a lot of programs were challenged initially, especially they're used to operating on site. And so initially there was a sense they would shut down, but we did a survey about a month ago at the end of June, and 75% were still operating in some capacity in low-income communities, making sure that they were connecting with families, making sure that the families had resources and meals and other priorities that they would need to continue moving forward. And so we're hoping to continue those conversations as how schools are going to need safe spaces for students during those days when they're virtual and those days when they're hybrid, and those spaces are going to need technology access. And there are already innovations we've seen, like in California, there are some innovations on community hubs that are creating spaces that are outside of the schools where students will have digital access, caring adults, the types of people they need. And again, in order to service this entire education community, it's really every single partner that needs to come together and have conversations about these, as well as others were saying, kind of the federal government and others recognizing the amount of investment that's really needed to serve these students well with the technology that they need and the resources that they need in this space.
Thank you, Jillian. Antonio, you talked earlier about workforce development and among other things. How can you share specifically how your piece on workforce training is being impacted by COVID?
I will, Felicia. I just want to, just for a quick mention, that there's a phenomenon called the summer slide, that every summer for the 2 to 2.5 months that kids are out of school, you have a drop-off of 25, sometimes 30%, especially with minorities, in terms of what they learned during the academic year that they lose over the summer. That slide is now 6 months at least instead of 2. So we have to look at how to make that up. So there's a different gap that we're dealing with that comes from this elongated period, especially, hopefully things are going to be better in the fall in terms of how they're going to handle things digitally or this amalgam of going into school a couple of days, this hybrid. But I know it didn't go well that in the spring because everyone in the world was unprepared for what was about to happen, in all fairness to everyone involved. So that means essentially our kids haven't learned since February, all the way through September and beyond. So I just want to mention that as it makes all of us collectively have to work even harder to catch up beyond trying to move forward. In terms of the workforce development part, as much as it's that this issue has become more difficult for obvious reasons. We used to work through the schools, and even then it was a challenge to make sure they had adequate Wi-Fi. We used to bring numerous hotspots. We used to do what Jillian was just talking about, where we'd have buses that were hooked up to Wi-Fi and then have people work around them. We would try to work with local restaurants that had Wi-Fi to let kids come and work. So we had to get creative. Now they can't gather. So it's become even more difficult that you have to deal with individuals' homes. And so the workforce development part starts at education. I mean, some would say that K through 12 is actually workforce development because you're trying to put them in a position for when they go, if they go to college, even if they go into the workforce, there are some really great careers you can have right from getting a GED. That's the beauty of technology. It almost levels the playing field in terms of your opportunities in some strange way. If you have an equal facility to playing video games, to building video games, to being in cybersecurity, there's a beautiful line here beyond the traditional lines that we've had in the past. Well, that's even more difficult when we can't execute our programs. This program that we're doing with Savio is fantastic. If you have access to Wi-Fi at home and also to the right technology in terms of the right computer that you're able to do the programs that you're supposed to do. And let's not forget that I think it's now something like 85 to 90% of all jobs that are posted online. As we're doing more and more work in rural areas with farming communities and their children, or native communities, we talk about our minority communities. Boy, we need to talk more about our native communities and what's going on in terms of that equity issue. So it's all become a bigger challenge, but with challenges comes more creativity. With challenges comes more adaptability and changing course with how we, even as an organization, I've been here almost 20 years, and we've done things differently in this past 6 months than we've done over the 20 years. So there is an element of rethinking how you're doing things and figuring out better ways and more productive and efficient ways of doing things. But this is where we're going to count on Laura and her colleagues in the private sector, because I'm not kidding you. We actually follow where they have provide access and less expensive access to technology as part of our strategy. Otherwise, we're dead in the water. Emily and Cindy and we can't do anything if we don't have that footprint where we can follow it and know that we can, at the very least, have a fighting chance of having our communities connected. But yes, this is impacting a lot of things, but I think it's also impacting our organizations to think differently, to be more creative, to be more impactful, and to leverage technology more, just to have to make sure that everyone's connected.
Thank you, Antonio. The leveraging piece is huge. It's definitely huge. And I heard you say leveling the playing field. It's all about having and providing access for everyone. Emily and Katherine, you want to share some of your challenges in this COVID?
Sure. I definitely resonate with what you're saying, Antonio and Jillian. I think this is a very unique opportunity to innovate our old systems to address that learning loss across the entire country. And I think, for our librarians too, we've specifically been thinking too about what are the types of resources, materials we can really adjust quite significantly in order to fill that need, because we know that everyone is overwhelmed. Everyone's trying to make these pivots. And so how can we make that as smooth of a process as possible, as we're pushing to be more innovative. And so definitely that's been a challenge for us. We have chatted with a lot of our community partners, our departments of education, school districts, library networks that we work with, and a lot of them are identifying the same things. The question about digital access is a huge one, and the hotspots, as you're all mentioning, and also thinking about equity. And I think this, because of the mental health pieces too, and a lot of the social movement through Black Lives Matter and a lot of really important things, there's a lot going on in the world. And so how can we give our young people and our educators and librarians tools to do something about it if they're feeling stuck and feeling like there's that helplessness in the world right now that it's really hard to address. And so for us as a whole, we've been really working nonstop to really convert all of our materials to, online. Right now for our college program in particular, we've included a lot more virtual support capabilities, best practices for supporting each community, and encouraging them to also be really brave and resilient during this time to adjust, whether they are taking a look at some of the digital access and saying, okay, if my library patrons don't have access to the technology, how can I adjust it? Am I, printing out some resources, and they can still work on some computational thinking offline during this time so they're prepared and ready to go by the time that they're back and able to access things online. Or maybe if they have one computer, smaller hotspot bandwidth access in their home that they're sharing maybe with lots of other family members. Okay, well then if you can't meet regularly during a specific time, can you have a mix of asynchronous and synchronous lessons? Can you pre-record some of your sessions so that way the students can still see their faces and still get that emotional support and guidance, but maybe they're watching it at a later time after their parents and guardians stop working. So there's different, I think, workarounds that we've really had to build in to support the communities. And our goal really too is how can we adjust the training, supports, and everything so that way they could just pick it up and run with it. They don't have to think about anything else. There's a lot of challenges and pivots they're doing already, so we can make a little bit easier. And, I think for us as a whole too, we're really thinking about our college students and having them kind of support the younger generation too, the K through 12. We have about 80,000 college-age alumni now, majoring in computer science and related fields at 15 times the national average. Our Black and Latinx alumni at 16 times the national average. So how can we use that momentum of folks who we've already supported and have them give back? So I definitely encourage a lot of library communities too to reach out to this community, find other volunteers, people who can support them, whether they're going virtual or just getting extra hands and extra help, but also giving the community a way for them to connect and combat the social isolation. I think that a lot of folks are feeling during this time. So really resonating too, once again, Antonio, like bringing everybody together. It's the whole community and kind of this collective activism that we can really ignite to improve the lives of our young people.
Thank you.
Just to add to that, it feels a bit strange to say this, but the pandemic has actually made it so that it's kind of Libraries Without Borders time to shine. We've always had to, as a small, scrappy organization, we've always had to be creative about, the channels that we use, informal networks. Our distribution model by virtue of, our size is invariably grassroots. So whether it's, sending text messages or having, establishing a strong relationship with someone who's a leader in the community or somebody who's a connector, and then they text other people because folks don't have connectivity to let them know of the ConnectEd kits in this case. Or churches, or recently we distributed, I think, 22 of the ConnectEd tech kits at a community garden in Baltimore. And that's just an example of, people need access to food and they need access to devices and the internet, and they can get it in one fell swoop. The community garden in that case is like our laundromat. We've worked with food banks to add resources to their own distributions. And oddly enough, we're learning from our work in refugee camps where we use exactly what Emily was talking about, asynchronous and synchronous, a combination of the two, to actually help people with certification programs. So that's something that's on the horizon for us here in the U.S. Because, phones can only go so far. We want to make sure that people have devices like laptops where they can, for kids, do their homework, or for adults apply for unemployment benefits, or for work, or whatever it is that we do online, which is pretty much everything these days. So we just we're trying to also serve as a connector ourselves. Baltimore City Public Schools actually reached out to us because, as many of you mentioned, school may be reopening soon, and the city, the public school system said that they actually don't really have an idea of how to get devices and hotspots to the families that need it most. They sent out a survey, they got a 40% response rate, and so they know there's a need, but they can't identify how to fill it. And this is where we come in, because our informal networks have actually been incredibly successful at helping us identify where the need is, and getting these very devices and connectivity to the people who need it most.
Thank you, Katherine. That's a very important point. The reality is that as we look at the data, there's a direct correlation between those who don't have access and the poverty level, meaning that typically those who are in lower income brackets are the ones that are being left behind. So it's important, as you even mentioned, about interfacing some of the social services with the digital inclusion. Thank you to both of you. Without further ado, I'm gonna, in the interest of time, go ahead and hand it over to Laura.
Thank you, Felicia. This has been a great conversation. I know we're kind of winding down now, so I wanted to make sure that we left time to talk through solutions and lessons learned. We're also going to be hearing from one of our fellow DEI working group members, Cindy Benavides. So I will say that, hearing all of you, I know these times have really been tough for a lot of organizations in terms of their ability to really find ways to continue pushing forward with their programs and serving communities. I like Antonio, Hispanic Heritage Foundation, I do think that this is also an opportunity where there are some bright spots. There are new opportunities for creativity and ingenuity, particularly as it relates to transitioning civil society back to work, students going back to school, as Katherine, you mentioned, and all the everyday things that we used to do before COVID kind of hit us, right? So my next question is really more focused on capacity building. And Katherine, I'd like to continue with you on this question. Based on your work with Libraries Without Borders, what are the opportunities for capacity building and ensuring that your partnerships with libraries as well as with community organizations continue to have the tools and resources to develop and implement programs that are successful?
Thank you, Laura, for that question. I think it really addresses, again, not to emphasize the small and scrappy bit, but how that's actually a benefit for Libraries Without Borders. Because we are small, we are able to take risks and fail without it having huge implications for our, we don't have investors, but also for foundations or other organizations that invest or that support our operations. And so we're able to approach library systems that are much larger, for instance, the Enoch Pratt Free Library in Baltimore, and say, hey, we want to try this partnership in a laundromat, or we want to try virtual story time with your librarians and our Connect Ed kits, the families who have them. They don't have to make a large investment in trying out this arrangement because we lower the barriers, right, for library systems and other partners who are much larger and potentially more bureaucratic than we are. And so we're able to provide an extension of those services to people directly in their homes. And it's an opportunity to try these new things that might not otherwise get tested. And then to develop a use case and see, is this worth putting more money, spending more money on? If so, then let's scale up. If not, what do we need to change? What can we improve? So it's really an opportunity to help larger institutions and organizations through their partnership with us try new things that they might not otherwise.
Okay. I And maybe we make this question kind of a more free-flowing question, because it's really just about, what are the opportunities for capacity building? Where can organizations benefit? What are the things that can be done better that maybe are low-hanging fruit? So I would encourage folks to chime in as well as they see fit. But, Emily, I know you have a lot of programs as well, and Broderick, so maybe you all can provide some perspective there as well.
Absolutely. I think overall, even though there is so much challenge with, accessing, digital access, and then also just kind of pivoting a lot of our programs, I do think there's so many really fantastic organizations like ours and like others who are, putting together very kind of quick, go and run with it resources that people can use. So it's just a matter of finding them, getting connected to them, and being able to get that support to move forward. And so in terms of kind of our capacity building that we're doing to support a lot of libraries is really helping them, to really help our young people navigate this new normal for that job security and future and more as we work with these libraries. And so for us overall, I think as we, create very clear meeting guides, we have over 120 plus hours of curriculum across a variety of skill levels, with group builder, community building activities, women in tech spotlights, summer speaker series, and a lot of virtual things that they can tap into. I think that's definitely something that they can use. Also, what does continued engagement look like? So we do have student recruitment resources, but lots of tips and strategies to keep the young people engaged and participating overall. So I do think that'll definitely support them. Plus our alumni programming too, like specific job platforms to help our college students go and move into these different roles. And I think libraries in particular can be really great connectors to make that happen as well. And so for them, they definitely, should know that they're not alone, that there's definitely people out there to support them, resources that they can access. So they should, sign up to different newsletters from STEM organizations in their state. There's so many STEM ecosystems they can tap into. And these newsletters can help them find those resources or tap into, folks like us or follow and find ways to, take this and then share it out with their community. We even had, code at home resources, which are standalone activities online or unplugged that people can use. And so many organizations are creating things like this. So definitely tap in there. So that way they're not also getting burnt out so quickly, as they're going through and doing the best that they can for the community too. And also knowing when to take a break, have some self-care so they can have more community care as well.
I wanted to just first refer back to something that's been emphasized. Antonio brought this up, for example, a few minutes ago around the idea of the summer slide. We know that exists. There's enough data, sadly, to show that it exists and the impact of it. We also, though, now are faced with not just an education-related summer slide, but also, of course, one around the mental health of these young folks. And related to that, for me, is again looking at what can be most helpful as we go forward, as we emerge from this pandemic. Is for those young folks who do have access, who do have the tools, you worry a bit about them becoming isolated, and they come out of this pandemic more isolated, more sort of focused on a device as the way in which they engage with the world. So I think we need to be very, very careful and measure the impact of the mental health crisis and the isolation that can bring as we try to bring young people together. Because on the other hand, we could certainly use digital capabilities in order to make sure that people are coming back together again. For example, mentoring programs, again, starting at libraries where they had to cease as gathering places for a while. So I think we have to, just look at both the opportunities, but also the costs of this period and what, digital equity has to say about both those sides of the coin.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments. So what I want to do, because we're kind of running low on time, I want to kick it off to Sindy Benavides, who's our fellow working group member, to provide some perspective as CEO of the League of United Latin American Citizens, LULAC, and also as our working group member. And then following her comments, we're just going to move into some Q&A from our committee members. Sindy, can I hand it off to you?
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. And thank you so much, Felicia, for moderating this panel, and to all the panelists. Thank you for all of your insights. Definitely agree in terms of the tech and digital equity gap of making sure that we have connectivity hubs, digital literacy, mentoring, addressing the gender gap, and obviously looking at how COVID-19 is impacting our various communities, especially as we see as communities of color. One, the increase in the education gap, definitely already seeing the summer slide. At LULAC, we're about 91 years young, 91 years strong. We're a Latino civil rights organization, and we do a lot of different things. And one of those is not only addressing education, health, civil rights, political empowerment, but also technology. And in that strand, we have something called our Empower Hispanic America with Technology Centers, which we actually created under President Clinton. So we've been doing this now for close to 2 decades, and more than 2 decades, in fact, to make sure that we're addressing that gap in the Latino community. And what that is 68 technology centers around the country and specific Latino communities. And we work with everything around digital literacy to making sure that we have workforce development, mentoring, and leadership development. And, you know, one of the proud partnerships that we have is actually with the local library in San Juan Bautista, and partnering not only with the library, but also with the Mayor Mary Vasquez Edge, to make sure that we uplift this program in the school system and in the entire community. And we're very proud. It's a rural community. So obviously, you know, making sure we're addressing the gaps in the rural community is really, really important. We have similar programs and technology centers across the country in different cities, but also in rural areas where our communities are impacted. I will tell you that we also have something called Tecnolochicas, and that's specifically for our Latina middle school age youngsters. And what we have learned through Tecnolochicas is obviously making sure that we're more than 2 to 3% of Latinas in this specific field. But what we're learning is that we have to start making sure we're investing in our youngsters at a very early age, starting even before middle school. And correlation that we're finding as we look at the data and assessments is that there's an improved confidence in our Latina middle school age girls as they're being exposed to the technology field. And so, you know, we are continuing to invest in that specific section. And then we also have something called the Latino Tech Summit, which is really for young professionals, individuals who are in college, to make sure that we are connecting, that we are mentoring individuals who choose to go into these fields, and that they are also connecting with the different corporations who have careers in the various fields that exist. And one thing that we're learning is really that mentorship or sponsorship component of making sure that as communities of color going into the specific field, that they have the sponsorship of individuals that can really help them in terms of understanding workplace culture, and train them around those things that are not innately trained or exposed to. I did want to just acknowledge the great work of my brother in La Lucha, Tony Tijerino. We do so much work. Broderick, I already sent you a LinkedIn request. I'm hoping to connect with you on my brother's keepers. And Cyndee, Emily, Kathleen, and Jillian, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. I did want to end it by saying that we do have a financial relief program, and that also is paired with technology access, which includes computers and hotspots. And what we're finding in our community is that as Latino communities, and particularly the undocumented community, is self-evicting because the moratoriums for rent are currently up, what they're looking at is this location. So right now their priority is not even technology access. Their priority is just surviving. And so as we look at vulnerable communities, we have to really keep in mind the realities that they're living under COVID-19. And again, thank you for the panelists. And before concluding, Laura, I did want to acknowledge that today marks the 1-year anniversary of the shooting in El Paso, which is something that disparately impacted the Latino community. And so I did want to make sure that we did acknowledge that today is the 1-year anniversary of El Paso.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you, Cyndee. Okay, so I think we are at time. I do want to acknowledge our DI working group members. We do have a question in the queue that I can tee up very quickly before we move to concluding remarks. And this question is from our chair of the working group, Rudy Brioche. If you'd like to chime in here, Rudy, feel free. But his question is, what single library program or partnership that your organization relies on the most? So is there a specific program or partnership with a library that your organization relies on the most? It's one of our committee questions. And that's open to everyone.
I would just say to Rudy's question, Rudy, ours is just based on the different MBK communities and their own connections to the libraries within their communities. We've done work with New York Library, for example, with the New York MBK communities all across the city in different boroughs. But otherwise, it really is based on local relationships in terms of libraries.
And Laura, I just want to mention that because we haven't been able to work through the schools, which is normally how our coding programs and other programs work, we have to find where the students are that need our work. And usually it's much easier when you're working through a school system because they're all there already. So in order to do that, we've had to get creative with partnerships like with the YWCA and others. And libraries and museums have become essential as part of that because they already have a list of people that have normally been going to those libraries and museums in order to get access to some of the programming that Emily and Cyndee and we do. So, for instance, here in Montgomery County, where I live, there's the Kid Museum that's part of Davis Library, and we've had to actually ask them for help in accessing their networks that they have built over many, many years of physically having people there in terms of collaborating on a virtual program specific to the Latino community or underrepresented communities that they're also focused on. So I think it's even more important that these collaborations include libraries and museums, which in this case are combined. And I think more and more libraries are partnering with museums to give them additional capabilities as well in terms of the tech space and the maker space.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, well, I think we are at the point where I am going to hand this conversation off to some of our fellow working group members, Shelley Blakeney, Rory Litland, and also Jamila Best-Johnson, who's our designated federal officer for this working group and the committee at large. So with that said, I want to thank you very much for your participation. Shelley and Roy will go through some summary points related to both workshops, and we will close out our conversation. Thank you so much for your time.